weeks, it doesn't happen every Sunday, but some weeks I get so overwhelmed with the beauty of the music that we have here, and the words that we're singing to our God. That just happened to me this morning. I just got wrapped up. I felt like I got transported away from this place and into some heavenly place. So let's give it up again for our praise and worship. You know, there's this family that's been visiting our church a little bit. They seem like really wonderful folks, and they gave my family a gift of friendship. They gave my wife this bag of tomatoes, and they grow these tomatoes, and they're really beautiful. They gave her like this whole bag of tomatoes, and I'm so grateful for that gift. But I got to tell you, it's a little concerning as a pastor when you're walking up to preach and there's a whole bag of tomatoes on the front of you. Watch it. So we've been doing this sermon series called The Greatest Story Ever Told. And this series is taking us through the Bible, taking us through some of the great stories of the Bible. And it's this amazing thing, but every week we keep seeing that these great stories of the Bible, well, they could be written about us. We keep discovering that our stories are written right into the pages of the Bible. We keep discovering that the greatest story ever told is a story that's all about us. Amen. In our last message, we started looking at the book of Judges. And we saw this cycle that just kept repeating itself over and over again, where Israel would be doing really well. They'd be worshiping God and following God, and things are going really well for them. But then after things go well for a while, they start to forget about God. And every time they start to forget about God, that always leads to sin. And then the sin always leads to pain. And then once they've been in pain long enough, then they start to remember God again, and then they cry out to God, and God raises up a new judge to lead Israel, and then things start going well again. It's this cycle, it's this pattern, it just keeps repeating itself. And that's just what's happening at this point in the history of Israel. Another thing that's happening in this point in the history of Israel is that they are almost always under attack from one of their enemies. And it's really difficult for Israel because they're this tiny little nation and they're surrounded on all sides by enemies. And you know what's interesting? That's still true today. Israel is this tiny little nation and it is surrounded by enemies. It's true today. And it was true back then. Now, during those times when Israel was doing well, when they were worshiping God, when they were honoring God with their lives, they were always under God's protection, you see. Amen. And no weapon formed against them could prosper. But then there were those times when they would turn away from God. They would forget about God. And when that started to happen, they were no longer under God's protection and they were vulnerable. And their enemies often defeated them. And that's exactly what's happening as we pick up the story of Judges today. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. So here's this cycle again. They've turned away from God again. They've forgotten about God again. And so they're not under God's protection, and their enemies are defeated. Well, after they've experienced enough defeat, they start to cry out to God again. The Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian. So they've experienced 7 years of defeat at the hands of the Midianites. They finally cry out to God again, So God is going to raise up a new judge to lead Israel. And this time, the judge that God is going to raise up is a man named Gideon. Now, Gideon is a very interesting guy, and his story is a very interesting story. What makes the story of Gideon so interesting is that God needs somebody who can defeat the Midianites, right? So God's looking for somebody with some military experience, some leadership experience. God needs a warrior. God needs someone who is really strong. Only Gideon is none of those things. Gideon has no military background. He's got no leadership experience. Gideon's not a warrior. Gideon is not someone you would look at and define as being strong. And yet, this is the man that God is going to call to rise up and save Israel. You know, there's an old saying, God doesn't always call the equipped, but He always equips the called. Amen? So an angel of God appears to this man Gideon, and the angel says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now there would have been two immediate reactions Gideon would have had to that. The first reaction would have been fear. You can imagine you're all alone someplace, an angel of God suddenly appears and starts talking to you. Now, that's enough to scare anybody, yeah? So the first reaction would have been fear. His second reaction would have been confusion. Because that angel just called somebody mighty warrior. Gideon knows that's not him. So he's probably looking around to figure out who God is talking to. But the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Am I not sending you?" That's pretty clear instruction from God right there, yes? Amen. And Gideon is a faithful man. Gideon doesn't want to second guess God, but there must be some mistake here. Because he's no soldier, he's no leader, he's no warrior. And so he says, well, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. So Gideon is defining himself as being very weak here. He's saying that he just doesn't have the strength to do what God is asking him to do. My family is the least, and I'm the weakest in my family. Now, before you go thinking too little of Gideon, let me just tell you that this is one of the most important ways that your story is written right into the pages of this book. And this is one of the most important biblical truths you can ever discover. You will never understand the strength of God until you first understand your own weakness. Amen. I'm going to say that again. You will never understand the strength of God until you first understand your own weakness. Now, to some of you, that might not sound quite right, because that's not what our world teaches. Our world places a very high value on strength, and we don't place any value on weakness. You got to be the strongest, and you got to be the smartest, and you got to be the fastest, and you got to have the biggest house, and the newest car, and the best clothes, and you got to be strong to get all those things. Our world really values our strength. In fact, you could go to the nearest bookstore, you'll find a whole self-help section, and there'll be a whole row of books there that tell you how to unlock your hidden strength and be the hero you were always supposed to be. Because our world places a really high value on strength. Our world teaches you that strength equals success. That's what our world teaches. But as Christians, we have to be very careful not to buy into that way of thinking. And Gideon is about to teach us that the way that we look at strength is very different from the way that God looks at strength. Amen. So in the beginning of this story, Gideon identifies himself as being very weak. But the story continues. And Gideon knows that he is weak, but he also knows that God is not weak. Amen. And Gideon trusts God. So Gideon takes this really big step of faith, and he takes control of the army of Israel. And it turns out it's a very strong army. They've got 32,000 soldiers in that army. Amen. 32,000 soldiers. That's power. That's real strength right there. That's real strength. But God is about to redefine what strength really is. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands. In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her, announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. What? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Why would God allow 22,000 men to walk away before the battle even begins? It doesn't make any sense. But in whose mind does it not make sense? In your mind, maybe. Certainly in my mind. But our thoughts are not his thoughts. And our ways are not his ways. You see, God wanted to show Gideon what the strength of men looked like, so he gave him an army of 32,000. But more importantly, God wanted to show Gideon what the strength of God looked like. And so he started making that army smaller. He started making that army weaker. And there's a very important lesson God is teaching Gideon and teaching you. God didn't want Gideon to have faith in his own strength. God didn't want Gideon to have faith in the strength of that army. God wanted Gideon to have faith in his strength. Amen? Amen? Now, taking away 22,000 soldiers, that would certainly make the point. But just to make sure that Gideon didn't miss the point, this happens. The Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink." 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other men go, each to his own place." So Gideon's army goes from 32,000 down to 10,000. And then it goes from 10,000 down to 300. And there's some very strange stuff going on in those verses we just read. Clearly God is testing these men somehow. But I'm not even going to pretend to understand what's going on in this little chapter. I've had it explained to me. The way it was explained to me is that the men who got down on their knees to drink, they would have dropped their heads while they were drinking. And the men who lapped like dogs, they would have kept their head up. They would have kept their eyes up, suggesting that they were somehow better soldiers, that those men were somehow stronger. And again, I'm not going to pretend to understand what's going on, but I will say this. Anytime we start looking at explanations that point us to the strength of those men, well, I think we miss the whole point. Remember, this isn't about their strength. This is about God's strength. God is showing them that if they're going to be victorious, if they're going to win that battle, it's going to be by His strength, not by their strength. So if we start looking at explanations that point us to the strength of those 300 men, I think we kind of miss the whole point. God even said there, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you. Not they will save you. Do you understand? I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand. Well, Gideon's faith is being tested here, that's for sure. But where would he place his faith? Whose strength was he really depending on? Was he going to depend on the strength of that army, or was he going to depend on the strength of his God? It's a good question. It's Gideon's question. And it's also your question. Where have you placed your faith? Whose strength are you really depending on? Are you depending on your strength? Or are you depending on His strength? Where have you really placed your faith? Whose strength are you really depending on? You know, people who truly live by faith, and I'm talking about Gideon now, but I'm also talking about you. People who truly live by faith know that they cannot depend on their own strength. They know that their own strength is insufficient, and so all they can do is depend on God's strength. And the more they depend on God's strength, the more they understand their own weakness. Now again, that is not what this world will teach you. And if you were writing your own story, that's probably not the story you would write for yourself. You wouldn't want it to be a story of weakness, but that's what's happening in Gideon's story. And that's what's happening in your story. Now, if you belong to the world, you're going to want to be known for your strength. But if you belong to God, then you'll be willing to be known for what you really are. Amen. And what you really are is weak. You're very, very weak. And I know that's not what you want to hear. Nobody wants to be told that they're weak, but that is our truth. That is our condition before God. We are weak, but it turns out that's exactly where God needs us to be. God said that His power is made perfect in your weakness. Think about that. God's power is made perfect in your weakness. The secret to real strength lies in your weakness. Because it's in your weakness that God's strength is perfectly on display. Amen. Goes on and says, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Amen. When I'm weak, then I'm strong. That's Gideon's story right there. And it's also your story. It's the story of our weakness and God's strength. But it always starts with our weakness. That's our starting point. Listen, when you are an empty vessel, God can fill you up. But when you're already all full of yourself, you haven't left any room for God. In the New Testament book of Hebrews, there's this chapter, chapter 11. And the whole chapter is about these great heroes of the faith and all these amazing things they accomplished. Let me read you a section of that. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon. There's our friend Gideon there. I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms and administered justice and gained what was promised. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword. Now, those don't sound like the actions of weak people, do they? Those don't sound like the accomplishments of weak people, but look what the very next verse says. It says their weakness was turned to strength. That they became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Their weakness was turned to strength. Out of their weakness, God made them strong. In other words, strength was not their natural condition. Weakness was their natural condition. But when we align ourselves with God, supernatural things start happening in our lives. And everybody on that list, they accomplished amazing things, but every one of them knew that they did not accomplish those things in their own strength. Amen. That they were incapable of accomplishing those things in their own strength. They accomplished those things in God's strength, and they knew it. So God comes to Gideon. God says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Tells Gideon to go and save Israel out of Midian's hand. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And Gideon certainly didn't feel like any kind of warrior, but at least he's got this whole army of warriors. Then God took the army away. God makes sure Gideon understands his own weakness, you see. And then, once Gideon understands his own weakness, then God starts making him strong. Amen. And it's really fascinating the way God starts making Gideon strong. Here's the first thing he does. God says to him, if you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. If you're afraid to attack. Well, of course he's afraid. Of course he is. He's facing a battle that seems unwinnable. He's facing an army that seems much stronger than his. Of course he's afraid. And when you're facing a battle and you're afraid, the last thing you want to be is alone. Gideon needed someone by his side. Gideon desperately needed a friend. And so God says, go down to the enemy camp with your servant Purah. God gave Gideon a friend when Gideon most needed a friend. I don't know if you've ever had to face a battle and you felt like you were all alone in that battle. I don't know if you've ever stood against an enemy and you looked around and there was nobody standing by your side. But if you've ever been in that position, then you understand why it was so important for Gideon to have someone by his side. Amen. God gave Gideon a friend when he most needed a friend. I pray that God always gives you a friend when you most need a friend. God, please, all of those gathered here today, when they need it the most, God, please make sure that they have a friend, someone standing by their side. But I have another prayer. And I think this prayer is even more important. I pray that you're always able to be a friend when someone else needs one. Listen, every one of you, there is someone in your life right now. Might be someone sitting very close to you in the pews right now, and they're facing a battle, and they are afraid, and they feel very alone. You could change someone's life today just by telling them that they are not alone and that you will stand with them. Amen. So that's the first thing God gave Gideon. Gave him a friend when he really needed a friend. The next thing God gives Gideon is a supernatural sign. God tells Gideon to go down to the enemy camp with Purah. So Gideon and Purah, they kind of sneak down to the enemy camp, and then this happens. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hand." Amen. Now this is the enemy that Gideon is listening to. God just gave Gideon a supernatural sign. The enemy already knows the battle's over. The battle hasn't even started, and the enemy already knows that they've been defeated. It's a supernatural sign, and it tells Gideon the enemy is already defeated, and they know it. Amen. But remember, this isn't just Gideon's story, this is your story. Amen. Has God given you a supernatural sign to let you know the enemy is defeated? Here's the sign right here, guys. God gave us the same sign He gave. God gave us a supernatural sign to let us know that the enemy is already defeated. That's our sign. We already have the victory, and the enemy knows it. Amen? God gave Gideon a supernatural sign, and He gives us a supernatural sign. The enemy is defeated. Hallelujah. The story goes on. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. That's a pretty strange set of weapons to carry into battle, isn't it? A jar, a torch, a trumpet. Of course, if you go into battle with nothing but those things and you win, you're going to know God got involved in that battle. Amen? You're going to know God got involved. Watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I did. Look at the change in Gideon. Remember when he was saying, I'm the least in my family's the least in my clan, I'm the weakest. Now look what he's saying. Now he says, watch me. Follow me. Do what I do. You see, it's not the weakness of Gideon on display now. Now it's the strength of God being displayed through Gideon. And then this happened. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The three companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. So Israel won the battle. But in whose strength did they win that battle? Did they win that battle in their own strength? God even made it clear. He said, "I'm doing this in order that Israel may not boast against me, that her own strength has saved her." You see, guys, that's the message right there. That's the sermon right there. It's not your strength that wins the battles. It's God's strength that wins the battles. Amen? So where's your battle? Where's your battle? Where do you need a victory in your life right now? Maybe it's in your marriage, or in your career, or in your children's lives. Where's the battle? Maybe for you it's something more immediate, something more urgent. Maybe you can't get through the day without drinking or using. Maybe you're stuck in a toxic relationship. Maybe you're doing something that nobody knows about and you're secretly ashamed. Where's the battle? Where do you need a victory in your life right now? And here's the big question. Are you depending on your strength to get you there? Guys, this is a biblical message, and it is simple, but it is very profound. You must decrease so that He can increase. As long as you're relying on your own strength, you're not leaving any room for His strength. And I promise you this, our God will not pour His blessings into hands that are already full. Gideon learned that real strength is not in our hands. It's in His hands. Amen. Jason, would you join me back up here? Real strength isn't in our hands. It's in His. Remember, guys, this is the greatest story ever told. And it's a story that's all about you. So where are you placing your faith this morning? Whose strength are you depending on this morning? Every one of you, when you leave here today, you're going back to face whatever battles you have to face. They're waiting for you right outside. Now, you can go face those battles in your strength, but I have a better idea. Why don't you spend a few minutes right here communing with God, asking Him to fill you with His strength so that you're better equipped to go out there and fight those battles. Will you come? Oh.